Good morning and good afternoon, everyone, where you're at. Welcome to this event of the Uncommon Thread series, Co-Creating Societies of Belonging. This is a series featuring conversations with diverse advocates, scholars, artists, business leaders, and other thinkers who share a commitment to belonging. If you enjoy this conversation, I would encourage you to sign to our e-news, which you can find at our website, democracyandbelongingforum.org. And also follow us on Twitter and Instagram at DNB Forum to stay up to date on our future conversations. Before we begin with today's event, I'd like to thank our wonderful ASL interpreters, Kafi Lemons and Gloshanda Lawyer from Interpret, Educate, Serve, as well as our comms lead, Evan Yoshimoto, who's running the tech and making all of the magic happen. Today's conversation is going to be exploring a variety of topics from an interfaith perspective. We're going to be exploring questions such as how might bridging help advance belonging and co-design an alternative vision of a pluralistic we? Can it help in our efforts to counter authoritarian forces that actually point to differences and demographic change to stoke fears and generate backlash? And how does bridging between communities contribute to society at large? How does it do that? We're also interested in exploring how othering is instrumentalized, particularly othering of religious communities, and also how do we bridge when there is a power asymmetry. And joining us today, we have Ibu Patel. Hi, Ibu. We have Rabbi Moshe David Hakohen. Hi, Rabbi. And we have Samia Hathrubi. Hi, Samia. Ibu Patel is a widely acclaimed civic leader who believes that religious diversity is an essential and inspiring dimension of American democracy. He's joining us from the US. He was named one of America's best leaders by US News and World Report. He's also the founder and president of Interfaith America, which is the leading interfaith organization in the United States. And under his leadership, Interfaith America has worked with governments, universities, private companies, and others to make faith a bridge of cooperation rather than a barrier of division. He also served on President Obama's inaugural Faith Council, has given hundreds of keynote addresses, and has written 5 books, which is a lot. The last one, which touches on a lot of the things that we will be talking about today. We need to build field notes for diverse democracies, and which I highly, highly recommend. Rabbi Moshe David Hakohen served as the rabbi of the Jewish community in Malmo for 5 years, and he's the co-director of a wonderful organization that you should all look into, Amana, which is the Muslim-Jewish Partnership of Trust in Sweden and fosters bonding between the Jewish and Muslim communities in Malmo. Rabbi Moshe David Hakohen also serves as director of the Nordic Beit Midrash and Beit Din. And he also has a lot of academic background, and it focuses on research at the University of Haifa that includes an interdisciplinary approach to Jewish history and philosophy. And we also have with us Samia Hathrubi, who's a doctoral student at the Max Weber Sociology Institute at the University of Heidelberg in Germany. She studies Jewish-Muslim interactions both in Paris and Berlin. I think she's joining us today from Germany, although she was joking how nobody ever knows where she's at. In the past, she has worked as director of advocacy in an association of young activists in the Middle East, which is an experience that was coupled with her biographical history and allows her to understand the Jewish-Muslim relationships through time, and also led her to commit herself as director of interreligious programs within the Foundation for Ethnic Understanding in Europe. She's also been involved as a role model, coach, and mentor with an organization in France, and she has written several articles on the Muslim presence in France and on interfaith relations. She, for example, contributed to the discussion on the relations between Muslims and Jews in France in a book called Rétissons les liens. And she has also published a variety of papers, including most recently, an ethnographic piece on the study of Hebrew and Arabic among Muslim Jewish groups in Paris. She also teaches interreligious dialogue at the University of Strasbourg. And the three of you are joining us today. It's so nice to have you here. And we would actually like to start with more of a personal question. So I'd like to ask any of you who wants to begin, what's actually led you on the journey you're in to do the work that you're doing today? Maybe Rabbi Moshe David, do you want to get us started?
Yes, thank you very much, and shalom to everyone. And it's a privilege to be here, and I'm looking forward to the conversation. I think what brought me here, in other words, many invitations are sent, but the idea of belonging specifically is extremely important, even crucial, I think, to the world that we live in, which is pulling us apart and polarization of ideas. And it's something which is struck me at heart. I think, first of all, growing up within a conflict, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and losing friends on both sides, I must say, and also um, demanding or the challenge to ask myself, do I believe in the good? Do I believe in interaction? Do I believe in coming together that can overcome the evil that we all face, which is quite traumatic and really brings forward a lot of fears. I think coming from that, because of that experience and working from within, and seeing religion and learning from a young age that religion is a source of the root of blessing, and in that sense, definitely can bring people together and should rather than divide them, is an important message that I grew up with my rabbis. Um, and that was the result of me being invited to what was known at the time as the most notorious anti-Semitic city in Europe, the city of Malmo, and to come there to be the rabbi, I think was a challenge. I said earlier today, I'm speaking from Jerusalem, from the um, capital of Shalom, of peace. And I met with some Muslim leaders earlier today, and I said to them that I think one of the biggest privileges that and blessings that we have are the challenges that we face, because they force us to interact, they force us to move. And in that sense, coming to Malmo was either shut down the Jewish community and make a beautiful graveyard, or find a way to connect in a very difficult situation and really bring forward the connection that Muslim Jewish, to create a model out of that, which could go beyond political tensions and bring us together as minorities with the challenges that we face in Sweden. And I'm very glad that the graveyard is not any more beautiful, but the community is, in that sense, and proving that this vision that I came with is actually changing, together with a fantastic partner that I have, Imam Salahuddin Barakat, that we work together as representatives of our communities. Um, Not only, we can talk later about it, but not only as an interfaith, but as an existential partnership between us. So that's sort of the vision that I come with into challenging zones, and I think it forces and brings forward results.
Thank you, Moshe David. Anybody wants to go next? I pick.
I will continue. So first, I'm really, really glad to be here. I hope everyone hears me well. Miriam was saying, starting the conversation, that one of the first things that people ask me is, where are you now? And this is the question that my mother keep on asking me. So my nickname is Bint Battuta, the daughter of Ibn Battuta, who was a great traveler. And I come from people who travel. My parents come both from the same place in Tunisia. So I'm a Tunisian, French Tunisian, born in France, and I grew up with a very large family. I'm number 8 out of 9 kids, so basketball team plus replacement. We, for those who love basketball, probably, my parents were both illiterate, never went to school, and they basically came to France, just like many others, to find a better life for us, and they succeeded, alhamdulillah, as we say. And so I was born and raised in a very white and privileged place, which was funny because all my brother, all the neighbors who were living closely were mostly the same same category of people, which were migrants. But very soon, very early in time, I understood that I was different, right? In terms of ethnicity, in terms of religion, in terms of social class also, very heavily. So that led me in a very, really, when I was mostly at least 5, really, I knew I was different, and I was forced to understand that I was. So I was always seen as the different one in school, and I looked at myself differently. And when I went to Tunisia, because we used to go to Tunisia, that was the only summer, we used to go to Tunisia very often. And when I used to walk with my sisters in the streets of Tunisia, there was like this huge synagogue. For those who have traveled to Tunisia, if you go to the city center, very city in the Sharia al-Hurriya, streets of liberty, you have this huge synagogue. And I was always seeing those Magen David. I was always wondering, what is this story? Jews were present by like this synagogue that I was seeing, but they were not physically present. It was history. So for a very long time, I looked at myself, I look at Jews in the mirror of my own destiny or my own fate as a minority, a religious minority in France. And that led me to multiple discoveries. I studied history actually for that, to be able to understand Islam better, to be able to understand my own positionality in France. And when I started, so I started first teaching history in the French suburbs, and I knew there was like all my students were black and brown, and they had a lot of discussion because like the Shoah and colonialism was part of my curriculum. And it was really interesting to see how much they were interested in those questions. I stopped being a teacher, and then I started entering really the interreligious dialogue, living in different countries. I can talk about it later. And now I'm doing mostly the same thing, not in my ivory tower with dusted books. You don't see a lot here, but basically I'm continuing working on this subject of this we, or how do we create an inclusive Europe, inclusive Germany and France, while looking at the position and the contributions of Jews and Muslims, and like putting Jews and Muslims who are seen as the other, and put them in the center of the discussion and look at the contribution. That's also what I'm doing in a very different way as I was as a former activist and an actual researcher.
Merci, Samia. Ivo?
Thank you so much. My name is Ibu Patel. I'm founder and president of an organization called Interfaith America, based here in Chicago. We just celebrated our 20th anniversary. We were founded 20 years ago as Interfaith Youth Corps, have expanded beyond young people, and so changed our name. So I would say that my path to interfaith work, which I've been doing for about 25 years now, 20 of them professionally as the president of this organization, my path is in part as an Ismaili Muslim, and the recognition that in Islam, from the Quran and through the guidance of the Ismaili imams, pluralism is holy. So in the Quran, the ayah that God made us diverse nations and tribes that we may come to know one another, this notion that diversity is sacred, it's holy, it's created by God, and that the distinctive gift that humans are given is the ability to flow with and steward the diversity of creation. That's in Surah 2 of the Holy Quran, that where God teaches us the names of creation and doesn't actually give that particular gift to the angels. And so there's a sense that pluralism is holy. The second is the recognition that in much of American diversity work, religion is left out. And I think that that's a grave problem. I think that racial, the diversity work around race, gender, sexuality, class is hugely important. But I don't think religion is any less important than that. And in fact, it's the idea of building a religiously diverse democracy was probably the dimension of diversity that was thought was considered the most difficult by political philosophers for centuries. The notion that people from different religions could live together in mutual loyalty and cooperation was considered impossible. And I love the idea that so many of us now are doing the impossible and the sacred. So the Interfaith America seeks to strengthen and advance the religiously diverse democracy we have in the United States. The reason that we do it here is because we know that this nation the best. Although I was a graduate student at Oxford and started interfaith work internationally in South Africa, in Sri Lanka and India, and across the continent and in England, but realized that people in those nations needed to build their own indigenous interfaith movements, as Samia and Rabbi Moshe are doing. And so I'm proud to be engaged with them as they're building an interfaith Europe and elsewhere. And I'm involved in the project of building an interfaith America.
Thanks, Ibu. Samia, you've done a lot of work in practice as an activist, but also as an academic. So I was wondering if you could offer us a little bit of a contextualizing of Jewish-Muslim relations, but also like how that contributes to society at large as well.
I'll try. So I always love starting a very serious conversation as a joke, and I will try to imagine this one. So it's a story about a Jew and a Muslim taking a stroll in the streets of Paris, or maybe it's New York or LA or Malmö. So imagine that they are walking in the street, and imagine what could be the reaction of the people. So this joke actually was a social experiment. So it was done by two maids who walked in the streets, who heavily dressed like all the symbols of Jewish, like with a kippah, and symbols of a Muslim with a long sleeve and a keffiyeh, or hatta, as we say, or scarf, a Palestinian scarf. And the reaction that people had is, on one hand, really positive. People will take selfie with them. People will say, "Whoa, that's beautiful! What I'm seeing." And on the other hand, people will be the second round of reaction would be really negative. And what we witnessed is that both reactions are the same. I mean, two faces of the same coin. The following narrative between Jews and Muslim that is dominant today, whether it is in the US, in Europe, is that Muslims and Jews are like cats and dogs. They are eternal enemies. They can't be friends, right? So what I like to highlight is that this narrative is a constructed one. For a very long time, Jews and Muslims were living, for instance, if you take the example of Tunisia or Morocco or Algeria or Turkey, and there are many other examples, and they were seen as for the European, they were seen as Semites, belonging to the Semitic people. So this construction of Jews and Muslims being completely, totally opposite is very new. And this opposition and this narrative of conflictuality is often used, and this will make a link with the subject that we have today, is like this conflictuality and this opposition between Jews and Muslims hating each other is often used by extreme right wing. Since 20 years, you have populist parties or movement like in France, Le Front National, using this supposedly hatred between Jews and Muslims to present themselves as friends of Jews against the Muslim. It has been also showcased in the last French election with Éric Zemmour basically saying that new anti-Semitism is only coming from Muslims. So there's this whole debate of new anti-Semitism that is being used. I'm not saying that the terrorist attack in France or in other part of Europe has also brought, let's say, fuel to these discourses. So to link it, and that will be my last point, so we can have a discussion, but like populist regime or movement tend to highlight or to harden boundaries between groups. They tend to harden these discourses of us and them, and that is often used against religious minorities and Jews and Muslims, for the case that is my subject. And I'm done here. I think we can continue the discussion.
Thanks a lot, Samia, for giving us the context of both the relationships, and it's very interesting to think as well. I think when I hear you speak about like this idea that this conflict is viewed as natural, right? Like it's presented as something that's a given, but in fact it's not, and it has very clear historical roots. And at the same time, like I think it ties a little bit into your reflection earlier on, right? That you were looking at the fates of Jews and thinking like that could also kind of like inform like the fate of like what your community could be, and like that it's actually so intertwined because the far right hardens the boundaries. So appreciate you giving us the context for the conversation to follow. So I'd like to actually ask a question of Ivo next, if that's all right. If you speak of the importance of building beyond being critical, which is also an important bit, but I guess in and of itself won't move us forward. But particularly of building for a diverse democracy, and doing so also from an interfaith perspective. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about that.
Sure. So in my new book, which you kindly referenced earlier, Miriam, the book is called We Need to Build, Field Notes for Diverse Democracy. I highlight that we are in a social change moment that really centers critique. And I don't think social change is principally about a more ferocious revolution. I think it's principally about a more beautiful social order. And I think a more beautiful social order is defined by better institutions. And sometimes you don't have to destroy the old institutions to build better ones. You can just build better ones. You can just create a better school or a better healthcare clinic or a better diversity organization. And that's what I've tried to do here at Interfaith America. And in fact, the kind of origin story of my organization is me in 1998 critiquing the way other interfaith organizations ran, actually at a conference, standing up and raising my fist and saying to at an interfaith conference where there were lots of senior theologians talking, saying to them, "You're too boring, and where's the edge, and where's the social action, and where's the young people, and where's the true diversity?" And a woman approached me after I said that, a woman named Yolan Trevino, and she said, an interfaith organization that would center young people and would have social action as a key mode and would have a wider diversity, that's powerful. You should build that. And I've spent the last 25 years doing precisely that. And I think that's what we need now. We need people who are building better ways of doing things. And I'm very happy to be on here with Samia and Moshe, who appear to be doing that. And I think specifically what we need are civic institutions, which are related to health and wellness and education and youth organizations and recreation organizations. We need civic institutions that bring people from diverse identities and divergent ideologies together in initiatives that they can collectively agree upon and that guide cooperative relationships. I think that civil society is absolutely essential to diverse democracy. And the reason for that is because diversity means the differences you don't like. Diversity is not just about the differences you like. It's not all the foods and clothes that you like. It's the disagreements. And a diverse democracy needs to have a political system in which various voices can be heard, but ultimately some people win in elections and other people don't. And therefore it needs to, and because that's the case, we cannot only fight with each other in politics. We also need to have spaces where we cooperate. And I think we cooperate most inspiringly in civil society.
Thanks a lot, Ivo. And I think there's going to be a lot more to unpack on this as well as we go in the conversation, because it's, like how do we build like that diverse democracy, right? At a time when authoritarian populism is surging and they're pointing to those differences as something to be scared of. And also, I think it's going to be great to hear from all of you as well, like how to do that through a religious perspective or from an interfaith perspective. So I'd like to bring on Rabbi Moshe David. Rabbi, in your work with Amana in partnership with Imam Salahuddin Barakat, you do a lot of work to build the connections between these two communities, this trust between the Jewish and Muslim communities, but also with society at large. I was wondering if you could give us a few comments on that, and then we'll play a video about the work that Amana does. I'm sorry, Rabbi, you're on mute. It keeps happening to me, unfailingly.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, thank you so much. And I don't know if this is going to provoke Ivo. Maybe I hope so. In the sense that we don't use the word interfaith, because interfaith tends to take us to a specific area of notion of dialogue. And the question that can be brought forward is, how much effect does that have with the challenges on the ground themselves? And hearing you a bit, maybe you agree with me more than disagree. The question is, when things blow up in our faces, do we actually have effect on where those problems lie in the more conservative areas of the society itself? And I think that the work that we're doing it's important to come as an official representative of a community in the work that you do, and also because to work both with internal trust as a rabbi and dealing with the community and all of its needs, but taking that all of with you when you go forward to meet in a very challenging zone with a Muslim representative who then represents the Malma Muslim Network, Imam Salahuddin Barakat, that you mentioned. So in that sense, working, I think there's a point between minority and majority and the relation between them. What is our job as minority and what is our job as majority? And a lot of things get really mixed up or confused there. As minorities, it's very important to work for one another. I think is an important point, that we work for one another and that I can work forward through what I can understand from my own experience of discrimination and prejudice, but use that to work for the Muslim community and vice versa. That is how we can work for minorities, to strengthen one another in our religious identities, in the needs of ourselves as minorities. What we should not work on is strengthening the notion that anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, or other types of hatred are our problem. They're not our problem, they're the society's problem, that we can help pinpoint and show where the disease lies within the society. It's like a doctor who can help, find where the infection is. And it's been wonderful to hear from Muslims coming to the Jewish community, coming to me and saying, we have so much to learn from your experience in Europe, and we have the numbers to help you. So let's help one another. So with that in mind, I think that's sort of a balance we're trying to work on the other end as minorities, but also we work for the better of society, not for our own future. And I look forward to hearing the comment on that regarding interfaith when you have an existential question of your own survival as a minority, and not only a nice idea per se, and perhaps the whole world is heading in that direction. So that was a bit of a sort of a long intro, but I thought that the introduction video to our work, especially since the Imam could not be here with me today, it would bring our work the work that we do together for all of you to see. So I hope the time frame is still okay, Miriam.
Yeah, of course.
Populism and right-wing extremism is on the rise all over the world. The lack of cohesion of ideas and opinions have led to divides in the society, deepened even more by social media and feeds. Sweden is a prime example of the challenges, as well as the hopes and potential that a diverse society brings forth in Europe today. Malmö, being one of Sweden's most diverse cities, is a harbor city which has unfortunately received an infamous reputation for rises in violence, crime, as well as countless anti-Semitic attacks on the small yet vibrant Jewish community. Mosques have been attacked and burned numerous times, and headscarves torn off the heads of women, as many Muslims face Islamophobic hate crimes and discrimination, and do not feel welcome in the society to which they belong. Amana began working in this very challenging arena close to 5 years ago. In a unique partnership between the Jewish and Muslim communities in the city, we have decided to work together towards a common goal to counter discrimination and hate, building bridges between the communities and working together for a better society. Imam Salahuddin Barakat and Rabbi Moshe David HaKohen, founders and project directors of Amana, represent their communities, and serve as a model that despite differences beyond politics, we have much to gain when we put fears aside and step forward for each other. Amana works on the ground with educational programs and workshops in schools, universities, libraries, and throughout the public sphere. Amana brings the Jewish and Muslim communities together for evening sessions of learning and trust building, as well as working to shape opinions with representatives and influential voices in society. Amana has turned from a small project into an established organization, with its reputation and message reaching far beyond the city, covered in prominent national as well as international media. In 2019, Rabbi HaKohen and Imam Barakat received the prestigious City of Malmö's Human Rights Award, as the city acknowledged the uniqueness of Amana's message in fostering trust for the better of the entire society. A new story begins to emerge from this city of two minority groups that have chosen to turn their challenges into hope rather than only building defense walls, to find ways to work together for one another against the discrimination that they face, to create an understanding and appreciation for the culture and values that their communities bring to society, and above all, to set forward a clear message that no acts of discrimination or racism are welcome in the society that we all wish to build together.
Welcome back, everyone. I think we're all going to be on screen now. Ivo, Rabbi David, Moshe David was also commenting on Interfaith, so I want to give you the opportunity to respond, and then we'll continue with the conversation. You are on mute, I'm afraid.
Yeah, no, thank you, Rabbi Moshe, for that. So in a book I wrote called Interfaith Leadership, I define how we use the term. And what we mean by it is the interaction of people who orient around religion differently in a range of social contexts. And so, we use it basically, it could be atheists and Zoroastrians, Sunnis and Shias, Orthodox and Reform Jews who are building houses together with Habitat for Humanity, or working together in a healthcare clinic, or co-teaching together in a school. But it's basically how societies in which people who orient around religion differently interact. That's our principal concern at the organization, and how to strengthen those interactions so that they strengthen the broader society. Basically, whatever setting we're in, we agree to, however, if people want to use the term interreligious or multi-faith or whatever, we don't want to get into interminable arguments about language, but because we all carry the baggage of graduate degrees, we use the terms we use, and then we define the terms, and then we just agree to whatever other people want to use for the sake of ease and quickness. I will say that I think partnerships to reduce hate are super important. So thank you to anybody who is doing that work, because hate and violence, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, these are cancers in our society. And the work that we do, which I will call interfaith, but you can call it what you would like, it's not just to minimize the bad. It's also to maximize the good. It is to strengthen social cohesion. It's to multiply social capital. It's to strengthen identity communities. It's to create a narrative for a diverse democracy. These are what I call the civic goods of interfaith work. And so I am 100% sure that Samia, Moshe, Miriam, the folks at the Othering and Belonging Institute and the other organizations represented here, they believe in that. I just think it should be made explicit, right? That if there were no anti-Semitism, if there was no Islamophobia, if there was no religious or ethnic hate crimes, interfaith work would still be important, because strengthening social cohesion, building social capital, basically maximizing the goods of a diverse society, that's an important thing. That's an important thing. We're not just fighting the bad, we're maximizing the good.
I would like to follow up on what Ibu has said about social cohesion. I think what I really like on the Interfaith interreligious platform, and I will speak with the French lens because this is also where I've been working, is like, I mean, showing that people with religious identity can bring good to the society, can bring social cohesion instead of being a problem, is also kind of a rupture. It's like it's making people completely bugging friends, because often at least in the European context, religious people or religion has been seen for such a long time as part of the problem. They are fundamentalists, this is the way they picture, they are backward people, and showing that those people with the diversity, with their religious diversity, that it's true. I also agree with Patel when he said that religious diversity is not often like addressed. We talk about social class, we talk about gender, but like this religious diversity is often a blind spot in the activism, and showing that people of faith can bring something positive to the common society is kind of groundbreaking. The second point is I really like the fact that I really like what Rabbi has just said. The problem of anti-Semitism and the problem of Islamophobia is actually not a problem of Muslims and Jews. Like if you quote James Baldwin, he'll tell you the problem of, he said the N word, but I won't use it in his book, but he said the problem of black people, the racism against black people is not a problem of black people, it's a problem of white. The problem of Islamophobia and the problem of anti-Semitism is basically a European problem. It's a bit sad that what we are witnessing, and at least in France or also in Germany, is a fragmentation of the anti-racist arc. Muslims are working towards fighting against Islamophobia, Jews are fighting against anti-Semitism, and that's it. And it's really complicated today, and that's why I really admire the work of the rabbi and the imam in Malmo that I've been following since a while. It's also because they're able not only to break up, to break or tackle this first narrative of complete opposition between Jews and Muslims, but they are also able to find common ground and say, when I fight for myself, I also fight for you. Because at the end of the day, Muslims and Jews are often used either against one another, or like if you look at if you look at Poland, they're often like the fight. If you look at the anti-Semitism in Poland, for instance, Jews are accused of bringing Muslim into the country. There's this new anti-Semitic trope also in Hungary, using Soros, saying that Soros is bringing Muslim into the country. So the fate of Muslims and Jews in Europe is often intertwined, and that's why it's important to bring common ground. An interreligious platform can help also bringing people together as a first step.
Go ahead, Rabbi.
Yeah, thank you both. And I think it's not only a question of terminology, which you're right, it's just superficial, whatever words that we use, Ibo. It's a question of who we manage to reach. And sometimes words are important, or the words that we use. In other words, we can mean the same thing, social cohesion, but if you walked into more conservative background or less Western society-based immigrant society, for example, be it in France or in Malmö, Sweden, and you say the word social cohesion in Swedish or in English, you won't get across. But if you use the word Amana, then immediately it will click, because in the Semitic term of faith and trust, that means something, which goes back to what Samia was describing used to exist in Tunisia, because it was beyond politics. It's how do we live together almost in a tribal fashion? How do we, and maybe that is a more primitive way of looking at it, non-Western, but it's something that existed, and maybe it's connected to our roots. and where we come from. And going back to where we come from rather than saying where you come from is wrong and therefore you have to change is important, because then you can reach deeper into where the problems actually lie. I had a fascinating discussion yesterday with a digital project that we have, that we're working on for schools in Sweden, in which we have an animation base. We have two young girls, Tova and Nora, who become friends through it's an animation and then bring forward scenarios. And we were discussing through this. I had a discussion with the Jewish community because they were quite upset because they felt that by comparing the Quran burning, which is happening unfortunately constantly in Sweden, to Kristallnacht, I was taking something sacred and breaking it apart. You cannot compare the Holocaust to anything, was the point that I got. And my point was, it's not about comparison, it's about learning from. And if we have this experience of understanding how this otherness, going back to the subject here, how otherness in society can justify first discrimination that can lead to genocide, then when I see that otherness in society, I can decide either to protect myself or say, hey, that's something I can recognize, and not say that the situation in Sweden today is similar to what it was in the 30s in Germany. To say, how do I notice the health factor of society or disease factor in society through what I see? And it also can create bridges, because when we had the Quran burning, it allowed me actually to step into a Palestinian-based mosque in Malmö that otherwise I would not have been allowed into. But when I was there, I stood up for the Muslims and said, what you are facing here, we have faced ourselves, and therefore I can stand up for you. And I think in some way I was able to get beyond the high tensions of political tensions that came across from the Middle East with many of the Muslims that came across to Sweden, and then it comes upon the small Jewish community. So by using those roots, it allows a bridge to create a we, but at the same time to remain who I am. I think it's important not to be unapologetic about my roots and who I am, and not say we're the same, but also to find the similarities specifically in this discrimination that we face, and then step across that bridge for the other. And in that sense, it's something that that changes, I think, or can hopefully get beyond tensions and even reach deeper into sort of the bridges of extremism, even within a specific society, and break that apart as well.
Thank you, Rabbi. We're all doing this
work.
Miriam,
can I just say something real quick?
Yes, of course, please go ahead.
Rabbi Moshe, if your point is that we should be using the language that the communities that we're engaging with resonate with, I totally agree. Right, and so in spaces in which the term interfaith doesn't resonate, happy to use other terms. I don't feel as strong, but given that every term is imperfect, we choose one, define it, use it in our context, and are happy to, if God willing, inshallah, one day you give me a tour of your city, and I will be very happy to use the words that the language that you feel resonates most with those communities. I mean that quite sincerely.
Yeah.
So I do think that that's important. But again, given that language is imperfect and that we have to choose something, might as well define our terms as we use them, and then use whichever terms resonate best wherever we might happen to be.
Yeah.
And I guess you're all doing this work in a context where there's a rise in authoritarian populism. We've seen the recent elections in Sweden, obviously, with the role that the Sweden Democrats have played there. Obviously, experience particular in the US as well, with a lot of fracturing and competing realities. And that fracturing is happening amongst at the level of partisanship, but also within activist communities and in other communities as well. In France, in Germany, in Italy, obviously, with the first far-right leader coming into power. So I'm wondering, how do you think about your work in the context of this surge in authoritarian populism? And how can the work that you're doing precisely contribute to counteracting these forces and this deconstruction of the larger we, as you were saying?
Should I go again? Can I?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that with Swedish politics, if anyone has followed, because it did catch a broader media, the rise of the SD, the Swedish Democratic Party, which only 10 years ago was unaccepted by anyone because of their neo-Nazi roots and Nazi roots. And now they've become, it brought the government to a point in which they now have partners within the government that otherwise would not have been allowed them in. So it's a normalization of racism. And unfortunately, I think the Muslims find themselves stuck right in the middle there because they're, it's so easy to blame. We had it perfect, and now the immigrants have brought us this problem. And in that sense, there's a lot of mistrust that has come forward in general, and then promoted by this election campaign. So much so that there's a lot of fear and generalization and stereotypes that have been accepted. I mean, if you look at it and you say, wow, every fifth person in the street that I see now in Sweden has voted for this party, then it's quite concerning. And then the Jewish voice becomes very important as well, because where do we step in? In a way, we can say it's not our problem. But when and you even have some prominent Jews on the party itself, I'm sad to say. But to say, this is about something deeper than that I will not accept in this society. And therefore, I have to step forward and help break apart the stereotypes. And I'm not going to step away from this partnership that we have. On the contrary, I'm going to step forward and bring it forward and say, look in the mirror right now. Again, the Holocaust was not a Jewish problem. And what we're facing now is not a Muslim problem. And we all have the responsibility to step forward against it and not accept it and not blame the problems that we have in society on a specific group that are over 10% of the population in Sweden. So in that sense, I think that the work that we work for becomes even more crucial as we step forward into the world of polarization and social media and elections and everything that we see out there. It's quite concerning, but it also shows the importance of this type of partnership.
Thank you, Rabbi David. I'm going to give the opportunity to Sami and Ibu to respond as well. But also, I think we could be in this conversation for many hours, and I'm aware that we have about 11 minutes. So I want to put some other questions on the table as well, which is, at the Institute, we talk about bridging a lot. And I think in a way, like the work that what you're speaking about is bridging, right? Bridging for the sake of the communities, but also bridging for the sake of the larger society. But oftentimes bridging occurs when there are power asymmetries. So I would also love to hear from all of you about like how do we build, as Ibu was mentioning, and how do we bridge, or how do you think about when there's that power asymmetry, and what's the role to play, you think, from the minority perspective as well? Because as you were saying, it's not the Jewish problem. The problem is society, or it's not a Muslim problem. It's the problem of a society that discriminates and perpetuates stereotypes. So we'd love any reflections along these lines as well.
Yeah, I will say a few words. Rabbi was saying that when you enter a dialogue or this work, you shouldn't be unapologetic, and I think that's also an important thing to keep in mind or bear in mind, because interreligious dialogue is also a place where people have social class, they have different privileges, and they come with it. And often, and that's one of the limitations that I would highlight if I may be a bit critical to the interreligious or interfaith platform, is that often social class is not taken in account. When you come on an interreligious platform and you are coming from a migrant background, popular family, modest family. That's not the same that if you're coming and being a majority as Christian, coming from a bourgeois wealthy family. Like the relations, the power relations are completely different. That's one point. The second point is that it's very complicated to in some places to enter interreligious platform when you haven't built the trust within your own group. And I think the trust is important. In order to enter interreligious platform, you need to be clear about who you are and about your own identity in order to bridge with the other. So that's also something that I have seen, though, that I have witnessed in inter-religious platform. And there's also one thing. It's like this tokenism that is often happening, at least in the French context, when you have some religious group often taking, or most of the time taking, this imam because he's fitting their agenda, right? He's saying the good words, he's using this peace language, and he's always like, yeah, fitting this narrative and saying that Islam is peace and so on and so forth. So that's also one of the main challenges within those and the limitation of the interreligious platform, like not enough critical in this sense sometimes.
I want to say a word about power issues. They come up frequently and very often presented as if it's enormously straightforward. I mentioned the origin story of my organization, that I was a 22-year-old brown kid from not only a Muslim background, but a minority Muslim background that many Muslims think is heterodox, if not heretical. And I'm at a conference where, I'm wearing a raggedy t-shirt and shorts, and I'm shouting down senior theologians. I'm not the powerful one in that context. But the woman who approached me, Yolande Trevino, she didn't look at me and say, hey, you know what? You're young, you're rude, your daddy's not a bishop or a billionaire, you're wearing raggedy clothes, you only have an undergraduate degree, you're powerless. Just keep on being powerless. She said, hey, you've got a vision. You should build that. I think we should be very careful about assigning people the position of powerless. I think we should be very careful. In fact, I think that we should be very careful about saying that people from a different social class have less power. They might be the smartest person in the room. People of an ethnic minority background have less power. They might be the smartest person in the room.
I would, I agree. Like power structure is not only about being smart or not smart. I don't believe it's also about having a connection, having a social status, or be considered more entitled to do things. And then often if you look, and I will be very critical here, but if you look at a lot of interreligious platform, at least in France and in Europe, it's often dominantly with people who are already elite. And that's also one of or who are very highly educated, and sociological studies have proved it. It's often talking to people that have already the same words or status. And that's one that's probably different in the US. I don't want to like say that the situation is common, but it's also something that is a blind spot in some places that I've witnessed and studied.
Yeah, clearly, these things matter. I don't think that they don't matter, right? And I will. So over the last 20 years, this raggedy brown kid whose parents own small businesses in the western suburbs of Chicago, from a heretical Muslim minority, has built the largest interfaith organization probably in the Western Hemisphere. And if somebody assigned me the role of powerless Trump, I wouldn't have done it. And just to be very clear, I resent it when people tell my kids that because of their religion or their race, that they are not privileged, because we teach them in our house that if you have the breath of God and if you come from our family, you are the most powerful person on the planet. And I actually think that is a sacred.
I feel like the silence is deserved. It all in.
I'd like to just take it in a question of not power as status, but a question of what power we have to influence others. And the fact that we have to be very, very strong. Having nice ideas is not good enough anymore. The power of hate that is out there is extremely powerful, and it's also crossing borders. I mean, we just had this sticker posted up throughout Malmo, in which there was a crossover between a Swedish politician who lost her job, who was calling Anne Frank. She said that she was a horny girl. And from there, we had a crossover to Kanye West, and the two of them came together on a sticker that is now throughout the city of Malmo saying, Jews' death matter, Kanye West and Anna Frank together. In other words, there's a crossover of all of these crazy ideas that come forward very fast and in a very rapid way that is that people don't even realize, or that there are some smart people out there who just put together a sticker like that and in a very provocative manner, and then you're promoting all of that hatred, and therefore I think it's really on us as much as we can to step in and to cross over borders ourselves and to reach out as much as possible, as much as we can, because we don't have the privilege not to do it anymore. If we don't stand up, the world is the plus and the minus are heading away from one another. The magnetizing, the polarization is really pulling apart. And I think there's a lot of work to be done. And as I said at the beginning, for us, I think in Sweden at least, we've learned that it's not a privilege to decide whether we want to be involved in this work. It's actually an existential question of whether we're going to survive with our religious identity intact. And not so long from now, in terms of the Jewish community, we're a community of survivors of the Holocaust and second generation, now third generation. That's who comprise the community. The Muslim community is facing huge challenges in terms of keeping their religious identity intact in that secular liberal country. If we don't work together with all of that hatred around us, I really ask whether where we're going to be in just 20, 30 years from now in terms of our communities, and whether we're going to even have a future. Looking at France, looking at other places, it's quite it's no less concerning than it is in Sweden today. So my point is that it's not a privilege, it's a must for us to get the word out there as much as possible.
Thank you a lot. And I think that it's kind of like the perfect place to end this conversation. I think in a way it's a question, but a question that compels us into action, into reflection as well. Ibu had to leave, but I wanted to extend my gratitude to the three of you for joining us in this conversation. Hopefully we'll be able to keep it going and have many, many, many more, because this has been absolutely wonderful. So thank you so much. And thanks to the audience for watching us.
Thank you, Miriam.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Moshe. Goodbye, Rabbi. Thank you to Blushanda and the other interpreter also.
Thanks. The interpreters as well.